In today's episode, we discuss the carnivore diet, why hormesis theory of veggies is wrong, evolutionarily consistent diet, cancer and metabolic disease, real science versus dogma, and how we got nutrition so wrong in America. I really think you're going to enjoy today's episode, and if you do, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice, and also give us a share on social media or tell a friend. It helps us to spread the word. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. Today's show is brought to you by Icepod, finally an affordable, portable, and effective way to get the benefits of cold water immersion in the comfort of your own home. I opted for the Pro Bundle, which includes the Icepod, a water circulating pump, a special insulated lid, and a thermometer to check the temp of your water. Even in Georgia, the Icepod keeps my water between 60 and 70 degrees, and when I load it up with the 36 pack of water bottles that I use and refreeze after each session, I can easily get it around 50 degrees for the perfect cold water immersion experience. Despite being light and portable, the Icepod is super durable, and it's the perfect solution for anyone who wants to experience the benefits of cold water immersion without spending thousands of dollars for a home water chiller or trying to DIY your own. Cold immersion can help with recovery and muscle soreness, raise dopamine levels, help you wake up and be more alert, help you to burn more calories, mobilize brown fat, and more. Visit podcompany.com and use my special promo code SHANE50107 for $10 off your order, and each sale helps to support the show as well. Stay cool out there, people. Are you looking for the perfect high-protein snack that isn't loaded with stuff like MSG, nitrates, and sugar? Carnivore Snacks is the perfect high-protein snack made from quality grass-fed beef and salt. That's it. Each bag uses 1 pound of high-quality beef, lamb, pork, or chicken, salt, and nothing else. Aside from being easy, healthy, and convenient, they also taste great. These snacks are not just another jerky. They are way better. Give a bag a try, and I know you'll keep coming back. Check out Carnivore Snacks, spelled with an X.com, and enter coupon code SHANE05137 for 15% off your order, and each sale will help support the Renaissance Wisdom podcast as well. Welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast, where ancient and modern wisdom come together to create a better way of living. I'm your host, Shane Sorensen, and each week we speak with successful people from a plethora of disciplines in search of wisdom from their own lives. Your own personal Renaissance begins today. Let wisdom be your guide. Hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast. I'm with today's guest, Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Good to see you.
You as well. I'm very excited to pick your brain a little bit. I've been doing kind of like a modified carnivore diet myself for a little while. I was vegetarian for like about 6 months, 8 months, and I was actually feeling great in the beginning. And I kind of started to get some like residual effects that were going on with my digestive system and things like that. I started seeing like the carnivore MD and like Liver King popping up everywhere, and I started looking into it a little bit. So, I know you have a ton of experience and knowledge in that area, so I'm really excited to pick your brain today.
Yeah.
Why don't you just start out, just for anybody who doesn't know who you are or isn't familiar, can you just give us a little bit about your background and just introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, my name is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I'm an American doctor. I'm currently practicing in Australia. Specializing in neurosurgery, doing my residency here. And I've just always been interested in diet and nutrition, how that affects health and disease. I played rugby at very high levels previously. So I was an All-American in high school and played in the top leagues in America and also at the professional level in the UK and sort of semi-professional level in Ireland as well. Sort of after, I was sort of doing medical school and working as a doctor and things like that. So just on the side. And I always wanted to know how to best fuel my body to perform to my peak ability. And so I studied nutrition. I took nutrition classes while I was doing my undergraduate degree in molecular and cellular biology and chemistry. And also just studied a lot of these things on my own. Took things in from different trainers and coaches and players and things like that, and you just sort of glean as much information as you can. And I found that you'd have sort of good results and everything like that, but I found that I had the best results that I ever had when I sort of just happened upon a class I was taking in cancer biology at the University of Washington about 23 years ago, and we talked about the toxic nature of plants and how plants actually defend themselves by using certain defense chemicals. They make about 1 million different defense chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them, because they're under a constant assault, because they can't move, they can't run away, they can't fight back, and so they need to have other sorts of defenses. One of those defenses is just by being chemically poisonous, or they have other means as well, but that's a major one. And so we were looking at this from a cancer perspective and learning about how just Brussels sprouts had 136 identified carcinogens in it 23 years ago. I'm sure they've found more now. And white cap mushrooms had over 100 known carcinogens. And all the other different produce items that you would ever have come across, they all had dozens. So these are cataloged, categorized, named, documented. So it's not conjecture. This is hard. This is a hard fact. These things do contain these chemicals, and they do cause harm, or can certainly in large enough quantities. And in fact, we know since the 1980s that the just naturally occurring toxins that they use as natural pesticides and insecticides against animals and insects from eating them outweigh the pesticides we spray on them commercially by a factor of 10,000. So 99.99% of the pesticides and insecticides existent in a plant is naturally occurring in the plant. It hasn't been sprayed on it, at least back in 1989. Things could have changed since then. But the pesticides that they were using then were compared against mushrooms, just normal whitecap mushrooms. And they found that the mushrooms were 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the commercial pesticides that we were spraying on them at the time they were testing these against, specifically ALAR, ALAR. And so we were very taken aback by this and just blown away. And I remember thinking in my head, I was like, but aren't vegetables still good for you though? Because you just get inundated with this, that vegetables are good, eat your vegetables. Even though I hated them, they were just awful, and I didn't want to eat them, but that's what you're told. And that's why you eat something that tastes gross, is because, I have to, because it's good for me, which doesn't make sense anyway, because, deer don't go around eating the terrible tasting leaves. They eat the things that taste good, and so we're the only ones that are actually going against our nature and going against our natural instincts and saying, well, that tastes horrible, I guess we'll eat it. Which wouldn't make sense in wild. I mean, you wouldn't evolve to hate the taste of your natural food, or you die because you just, before we had, books and teachers and people telling you to do something that goes against your nature, all you had was to go with your nature. And so, we were very, very, very taken aback by this. And he just sort of looked at us, and he just gave us sort of a funny look, and he just said, yeah, I don't eat salad, and I don't eat vegetables, and I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And so that really struck home with me. And in my head, I just decided, right, I'm not eating any plants. I'm not going to touch these things. And I went to the grocery store, and I just went through the aisles, and just everything was plants or had plants in the ingredients. And so I just came across some eggs and meat, and I guess, okay, I'll just eat eggs and meat. And my athletic performance just went through the roof. My physical, just feeling how I felt, my energy levels were dramatically increased. My brain worked a lot better. I was much more clear of thought. It was like school was much easier to do and to balance with my heavy sports schedule, because I trained generally for around 7 hours a day in rugby, and then played multiple games on the weekends. And so, it was a very heavy schedule, while a full-time university student, and I was fine. And my athletic and, my exercise potential increased dramatically, but also my exercise endurance just went through the roof. So I was able to just go so much harder for so much longer. I recovered so much quicker. And so my acceleration just went way past everybody else that I was playing with and against. And so that was a huge advantage to me. I sort of slipped off of it when I was over in England playing there. And, some of the meat was breaded or had a bit of crumbs and things like that on it. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, is it that big of a deal? Dose makes a poison. Maybe it's not really doing that much to me. And I convinced myself that it wasn't that big of a deal. But looking back, I remember at the time, I was like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? And that was when that switched. I sort of came off of that. The most important thing it did was it's got me out of that mindset of just, I'm not eating anything with a plant in it. And so other things started slipping in. And that's when I just slowly got back into a more traditional diet, but always whole foods, always centered on meat, but now I'm including vegetables and some carbs and things like that. Whereas normally I would never do that.
Sure.
And it wasn't until about sort of 5-6 years ago that I came across Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan's podcast, where he was talking about how, hey, you can only get, you can get all the nutrients you need from meat. And at first you're like, oh, well, that's weird. But then, a voice in the back of my head said, well, actually, I sort of did that for 5 years, only ate meat because that was what I defaulted into. I'm not eating plants. What else is there to eat? Meat. And so I remember thinking and that was a period of my life that I've never felt better. I've never been more athletic. I've never been just physically as dominant as I was then. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll check it out and see what I think. And, within 5 minutes, I could tell that this guy was bang on, because there had been a lot of research that came out after that, after my, initial just avoidance of plants that really showed a different story about how cholesterol and saturated fat do not contribute to heart disease. In fact, they're protective in a lot of cases, and how fructose sugars are actually probably a major driver and cause of these diseases like heart disease and diabetes. So I got really interested in that, and I sort of just said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just went back to only eating meat and eating a lot more meat. And I had a dramatic difference in my health and my physical stature. So at that point, I just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh and in the refugee camps there with the Rohingya refugees. There was like a genocide in Burma in 2017, and 1 million people fled into Bangladesh. And so I was over there helping them with that for a couple of months. And so I was completely out of shape, and, you just eat whatever the hell you can eat when you're out in a refugee camp. And, right. So it wasn't really at my best, and I was trying to slim down. I was trying to get back in shape so I could play rugby again. And this is at 38, and I just wasn't feeling great. And then I dropped the greens. So all I was eating was greens and lean meat, because I was trying to eat very, very clean. And so when I dropped the greens and started eating a lot more very fatty meat, not lean meat, then my health just completely changed. I dropped 23 pounds in 10 days. And then I stayed about the same weight, but I just started stacking on muscle and shredding fat. I just completely changed physically, and I felt amazing. So even before I had lost all the weight and put on more muscle, I just felt physically amazing. And so I was able to go back to rugby just 2 weeks after that. After I started a carnivore diet, just felt amazing. Was able to just to run and compete at the same level as everyone else who'd been training that whole time I was gone. So it's something that I knew personally, really, really had a huge impact on my health and my athletics. And so it's something I just said, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? And I just started digging through the literature, and I spent months just reading. I was taking some time off from work at the time to help my folks with some health issues. And so I had a bit more time on my hands. So I was spending, several hours a day, if not, 8 to 10 hours a day, just reading studies and studies and studies and studies, just saying, okay, what can we show here, and what do we need to show? And I've come to the conclusion that humans are biologically carnivores. It's just the kind of animal that we are, and that it's not only better to eat more fatty meat, which it is, but that it's important not to eat plants and mushrooms and things like that, because they actually cause physical harm, physical and chemical stress on your body that can precipitate diseases. And a lot of the chronic diseases that we're treating nowadays, I think, are a direct result of eating an inappropriate diet for our species. And this is something you see across all animal species. If they, you ask any zookeeper, if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, something it didn't evolve on, it gets very sick. But the funny thing is they get the same things that we get, and they call them human diseases. They get human diseases if you feed them something they don't eat, right? They get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, and that's abnormal. Animals in the wild don't get these things, don't get cancer. And if you feed an animal something that it's supposed to eat in the zoo, it doesn't get cancer. And same with dogs and cats, which are known carnivores, and yet we give them grain and plant-based kibble, and they get all these same diseases as well. And vets are saying, well, there's this massive uptick in human diseases in the pet population, and they're not catching diabetes from us. These are non-communicable diseases by definition. And so how are they getting human diseases unless they're being exposed to the same things that are causing those diseases in humans? And that would be the food that they're eating.
Right. And then all the things you listed, those are metabolic diseases, right? So, I mean, they come because there's metabolic dysfunction in someone's body, right? It's not being fed the right fuels. It's not processing, it's not going through the insulin properly. It's not processing the carbohydrate intake properly, and the fat accumulation is all a byproduct, right? Like when you look at someone with, I guess, diabetes, or when you look at someone with heart disease, you start to see a lot of the same things, right? Like abdominal fat around the midsection. You start to see, I guess, like elevated triglycerides and things like that, right? They all kind of come as a package deal in a way.
Yeah, well, they absolutely can. And we look at MRIs and just measuring visceral fat, but also intramuscular fat in the various muscles. That's there's a direct correlation with various chronic diseases. And so, a lot of these things, do come down to a metabolic level at the mitochondrial level. You're damaging mitochondria. They don't run properly. Cancer has been shown, as far back as 80, 90 years, to be more of a metabolic issue than a genetic issue. Nobel Prize winner Otto Warburg actually showed this. He did decades of research on cancer and the mitochondria, and he wrote a seminal paper in 1951 called "The Origins of Cancer," and he showed all the evidence for how this is just coming from mitochondria. You can have different genetic abnormalities in cancer cells, but they don't all have those same genetic abnormalities, but they all do behave as cancer. And in fact, there are tumors and cancers that actually have no genetic changes whatsoever. So that sort of throws a wrench in the gears of it's 100% genetic. The mitochondria in all cancer cells are damaged. They can't go through what's called oxidative phosphorylation, which is a normal generation of ATP. And so they have to go through substrate level fermentation, like in the cytoplasm, outside of the mitochondria. The mitochondria do a lot more than just make energy. They actually run your whole cell. And so they go around to different organelles and they turn things on, turn things off, switch on genes, turn off genes. And they can actually, they're in charge of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And so when something's going screwy and they say, okay, well, this cell is breaking down, we just need to shut it down and just end the cell. That is actioned by the mitochondria. And so that's one of the hallmarks of cancer, is that these cancer cells can't turn themselves off. They can't just kill themselves because they're acting funny. And that's because they have damaged mitochondria. It's also mitochondria that regulate cell division and growth. And so another definitional hallmark of cancer is unregulated cell growth and division, right? I mean, that is cancer. It's just growing out of control. That's also due to dysfunctional mitochondria, because it's the mitochondria. If you have healthy mitochondria, they can stop and limit growth and division. Whereas if they're damaged, then it just goes. They don't have a stop mechanism. And so you get this, so it's not, you don't have the regulators there, so it gets unregulated and just goes and goes and goes. So those are hallmarks. But also, there have been studies that show that if you take the nucleus out of a cancer cell, so you get all the DNA, all those genetic changes, and you put those into, and if you get one with genetic changes, they don't all have genetic changes, but if you get the ones that do, you take that nucleus out and you put it into a normal cell with normal mitochondria, it doesn't behave as cancer. And you can actually clone it and get frogs and mice and things like that from this. Whereas if you take the mitochondria out of a cancer cell and put those into a normal cell with normal DNA and a nucleus, it does behave as cancer. And you try to clone it, it just dies, and you can't make anything of it. It just it's not healthy. And if you take healthy mitochondria and put them in a cancer cell, it suppresses the tumor. It suppresses the cancer. So that's a pretty good decent chunk of evidence to say that, okay, this is a mitochondrial disease primarily. And but there's so many other things. I mean, we're coming across data in clinical trials and more, and more evidence showing that things like even schizophrenia and depression, they come down to the level of the mitochondria. And when you fix people's metabolism and you fix their mitochondrial health, which you can do by a number of different means, but a major component of that is diet, that you can actually reverse schizophrenia and major depression and OCD and bipolar disorder. There's a professor at Harvard, he's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, named Dr. Chris Palmer, who just wrote a book called Brain Energy, and he's doing this. He's been reversing people's schizophrenia and getting them off medication for years now, and he has large clinical trials going. And there's another doctor, Dr. Georgia Eid, is also a psychiatrist, who just published a very interesting. She published a number of things, but again, clinical trials using different metabolic interventions to get people better from psychiatric disorders. One of the main ways is a ketogenic diet, which a carnivore diet is, if you do it right. And the reason being is that when you're in ketosis or on a ketogenic diet, people know this from fasting, you turn on different genes, you turn on different mechanisms and get different stem cells, and you trigger autophagy, which is just these cells that aren't really working properly. They're able to actually just shut themselves down and turn off, or the different organelles and different constituent parts in those cells can recycle and then get new ones. And you can do this with mitochondria as well. And so they recycle the old damaged mitochondria. Just dropping your insulin allows you to do this. And having high insulin, it suppresses this. And so, you're going to recycle these mitochondria, and then you're going to replace them with new ones, better working ones, and you increase the number of them. So there are a number of studies that show that after about 3 months or so on a ketogenic diet, you increase the number of mitochondria that you have in your cells by a factor of 4, and they're more effective by a factor of 4. So this is a dramatic increase in the functionality of your cell. And this affects your brain and everything else. And so they find that these people who are having these psychiatric disorders, that a lot of them, like as much as a third of them, can be completely cured just with these dietary changes. And another third have a significant improvement. And then, it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But that's huge, because the pharmacological interventions, the medications, only work in about 10% of people, And so we're finding, like Georgia Eid found in one study she published, it was 32 patients with intractable psychiatric issues, so major depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, and they were all institutionalized, right? So these people could not live independently. They had to be in a hospital setting, a psychiatric hospital, and they had all failed traditional medical treatments. All the different pharmacological treatments and counseling, everything like that, did not work for them, and to the point that they were institutionalized. They were put on a ketogenic diet. Every single one improved, right? So that's amazing, and that's an amazing thing you can do for someone. You can literally give them back their mind and their humanity and their and give them back their independence. So this is a very powerful tool, and a lot of these diseases do seem to come down directly to damaged metabolism, which a ketogenic diet, a carnivore diet, significantly help. And I think just plainly, it's because that's our normal diet. That's our natural diet. And when you're eating your natural diet, your body's going to work better. There's absolutely no reason to assume that what we evolved on, what we're biologically adapted to eat and thrive on for millions of years is somehow suboptimal. That doesn't make any sense. There's no examples of that in the wild. Like a lion's eating gazelle, but actually if they only knew about cilantro, like then they'd get healthy. That makes no sense. And there's no evidence for it. So, what we should do is look at nature and look at ourselves and realize that this is our naturally evolved diet. This is our biologically appropriate diet. This is how all of our physiology, anatomy, and biology are geared up to work with. And so just go with that and just go with the flow. Don't fight the river. Just let it take you.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense too. Like when you really think about the carnivore diet intuitively, like if you just take all of your programming out and you just kind of ask yourself, right, like you're out in nature, you haven't eaten anything for 6 days, and you're starving, and you happen to like come up to like a buffet table, and like there's one table and it's got like salads and like I'm sure you're going to crave some bread and things like that because your body just wants some like carbohydrates. But generally the thing that people would probably want to go towards is the protein, is the fat, is the meat. Like it just intuitively, that's what you would typically go for when someone's lost in the woods. Like they try to figure out how to hunt an animal, right? They're not trying to figure out like slowly which leaves they can eat that aren't going to poison them as much as the other leaves.
Yeah. Well, oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah. I was going to kind of dive into like, with vegetables, right? I know some of the things that I hear about vegetables, like why people say like it's so vital, right? One that I hear is like the hormesis idea, that by kind of slowly, like triggering your immune system over time, it gets stronger, your body gets stronger. And then, of course I've heard like vegetables, they're really good at combating like free radicals and oxidation, and that's why you need to have them. What do you like what research is there, or like why do you think that those aren't maybe valid arguments for the inclusion of vegetables in your diet?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, with the hormesis argument, it's not about evidence against hormesis. There is no evidence for hormesis at all. None of these guys are presenting any evidence. So they're just saying, oh, I bet you it's hormetic. And I was like, okay, well, what is your evidence for that? Because we actually do have evidence that these things are toxic. And so, yeah, sure, some toxic things at a low enough dose in a specific circumstance may confer a hormetic benefit. But past that range, it just causes harm. There isn't a hormetic benefit. And again, there's about 1 million different chemicals that plants make. And so which ones are hormetic? Because not everything is hormetic. Not every toxin is hormetic at any level.
What exactly is hormesis? Like I've heard it a lot. I know a little bit. I have a basic understanding, but like explain it to a 2-year-old. What is the theory of hormesis?
It's the idea that you can, it's almost like homeopathy, where you're sort of introducing some very, very low dose of something, and that's causing a stress in a way, and your body responds and becomes stronger as a result of it.
Okay.
But, I mean, if you think of it, and when people are trying to fool you into this way of thinking without providing any evidence, maybe they'll say, well, exercise is as an example of this. You're putting your body through stress, and you're raising inflammation, you're raising your blood pressure, you're raising your heart rate, and all these things sound scary, but over time you get a benefit. Well, first of all, you can overexercise and you can hurt yourself. You actually have to recover from that exercise, because you're recovering from that stress, you're recovering from that damage. If you don't let yourself recover from the damage, you're not going to recover, and you're actually going to hurt yourself. But that is an example of hormesis, but that's not a good analogy for what's happening with plant toxins. A better example of this so-called hormetic effect with toxins is called tolerance, right? So you drink alcohol, this damages your body, and your body says, well, that's poison. We don't want that in our body. So you start building up a tolerance and a defense towards it, so that if you encounter that stress again, you'll be better protected against it. And so as you go, you have to drink more and more and more and more and more to get the same result, because your body's building up a tolerance and it's trying to fight this stuff. So that's not giving you a benefit overall. That's not making you healthy overall. That's only making you a bit more robust and give your defenses a bit more strength to alcohol. But overall, you're getting weaker. Overall, you're getting damaged. And I don't think anybody's going to argue that, long-term alcoholism is not a benefit. It's not benefiting you. It's not getting you anywhere. And so, that's the idea. And so the problem that I have with that argument is that they are not providing any examples. They're not saying these chemicals are hormetic at this level. This is how much oxalates are in spinach. And if you have 3 leaves of spinach, grown in this grass, at this ground, in this amount, in these conditions, picked at this time, in this way, fresh, not dried, and all these sorts of things. So all these things matter. All these things change the concentration of different chemicals in the plant. Then that is a hormetic level. Okay. Well, then what's the hormetic benefit? Is it giving you an overall hormetic benefit, or is it just giving you a bit of a defense and a tolerance towards something? They don't say that. They don't go through a single example. And there are 1 million of these things. So they would have to go through individually and say, here are all the defense chemicals. Here is the phytic acid, the tannins, the lectins. I mean, these thousands and thousands of different kinds of lectins. Ricin is a lectin, right? And that occurs in beans and in ricin. And ricin is in the plants of ricinus, which is castor beans. We get castor oil out of these things. That is the most poisonous thing that we know of on Earth. Okay, it's created by a plant, not even humans. It is the most deadly thing that we know of. 1 microgram per kilogram of body weight will kill you or any other animal that eats it. Maybe there's something that's adapted to eating this stuff, but almost everything will be killed by this thing. So that, I mean, what amount of ricin is going to be hormetic? And it's certainly not going to be, even in 1 castor bean, that's enough to kill anybody. So you have to show that in the dosages that we're getting them in these plants, that is a hormetic level. Now, also, there are thousands, hundreds or thousands of different defense chemicals that any individual plant will make. Are all of them hormetic? Again, not everything is hormetic, but all the ones in spinach, are all of those hormetic? Are they hormetic at the same level, right? So if you get a hormetic dosage of whatever oxalates, are you getting a hormetic dosage of all the different lectins that you have as well, the tannins and the phytic acid? Are they all hormetic at that exact same level? Solanine, another toxin that nightshades use, and people still die from nightshades if they don't know what they're eating. I mean, this is simple, right? You go out, you get lost in the woods, you run out of food. You can't just eat any random plant, right? Most plants will make you very sick or even kill you. That's because most plants on Earth are inedible. We call this inedible plants and edible plants. So we understand that most plants are deadly. They have these toxins. They're not hormetic. But then we think, well, the ones that are edible, well, those are safe. Well, no, actually, they still have toxins. It's just that we have a better ability and capability of detoxifying them and surviving for the edible ones versus the non-edible ones. But that doesn't mean that they're just 100% safe. And so, so they're not providing any evidence for that. And they're saying that, well, there's this hormetic effect. It's really just it's a cop out, really. It's for a long time, they didn't want to admit that there were these toxins and defense chemicals in plants. Like, oh my God, that's crazy. I mean, I have so many people be like, oh, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? It's just like, this is a hard fact. I mean, these things are cataloged, categorized, named, and quantified. And you can just look it up in any botany book, any book on horticulture. And, you can just think about it. You get lost in the woods. What are you eating? You're not eating plants because those will kill you. Survivalists and special forces guys are taught when you're all lost in the woods and you're living off the land, never eat anything that doesn't move. That's a rule that people have. And that means it's an animal that's moving and that's alive, right? So you're not eating carrion and you're not eating any plant. And spiders, don't eat spiders, apparently. That's probably a good idea too. And so, I mean, think about it this way. We use different plants medicinally, and we take things from them, but these are toxins. Foxglove makes digitalis, and we use that as a way of strengthening the contractility of the heart in people that have heart failure, and this can help them, and this can help improve their symptoms and make them feel better. And it can save people's lives in some cases. But you're giving this in micrograms, right? The dosage of this is like 50, a couple hundred micrograms of digitalis. So the plant is not making that to help people with heart failure. That plant was making that millions of years before humans even existed, and I'm sure that they were doing that to defend themselves. They were trying to kill animals that are eating it. Like, you eat me, I'm going to drop you of a heart attack. Because that's the thing, you get that dose wrong on digitalis, then if it's too little, then it doesn't really do anything. If it's too much, like by 50 micrograms, it can stop your heart. And that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to kill you. It's designed to stop your heart and kill an animal that's trying to eat it, because you're eating it, it's going to kill you. That's the deal with these things. So you have to be extraordinarily careful with these sorts of things, because they can actually be deadly. And so just saying, well, I bet you they're hormetic that it doesn't, first of all, who says who? This is just a pure conjecture. And until you go through and you categorically go through, this one is hormetic at this level, this one's hormetic at this level, this one's hormetic at this level, and this level, and this level, and this level. And this is where you find, this is how many leaves of this plant will have that hormetic level, and all these sorts of things. You're just playing games. You're just trying to distract. First they were saying there's no such thing as these plant toxins. Then there's just and then they just did like a 5-minute Google search and went like, oh, okay, yes, there are. However, they're hormetic. 2 seconds ago you said they didn't exist. Okay, so now you're saying that they're hormetic. What evidence do you have? So they have no evidence of this, but we have tons of evidence that people get harmed by these things. We have tons of evidence. The WHO, who pushes a plant-based diet, but there's thousands of people that work for the WHO, and different people write different articles. But there's a webpage from the WHO, World Health Organization, that talks about all the different natural defense chemicals and poisons that exist in the plants that we eat, not the inedible plants, the edible plants supposedly that we eat. And a lot of these things have to be detoxified. They have to cook them. You have to soak beans and kidney beans in water for a period of hours, and then you have to boil them for a certain period of time. That's to try to detoxify some of these things and reduce the amount of lectins. It doesn't get rid of them altogether. It just significantly reduces them so that they're edible, that you really won't die off them. But even on the WHO website, they say about how like as little as 5 kidney beans, which is like a normal thing for people to eat, undercooked, can put you in the hospital, right? So is that a hormetic hospitalization? No. That is causing serious harm and threatening your life. There are different things like cassava roots that have so much cyanide that if you don't treat these things properly, it can kill you from the amount of cyanide. But when you treat it, you're still getting low-grade cyanide poisoning. And so you can get long-term, you can get thyroid dysfunction and neurological impairment from eating this stuff. And cassava is the number one calorie source for 500 million people in the tropics, right? So that is not a small issue. If you don't prepare these things properly, you can get in trouble, and people do get in trouble. And there's so many other ones. They just go through all the different categories of different toxins, like the lectins, furanocoumarins, cyanogenic glycosides, all the mushroom toxins and mycotoxins, things like that. All of these things you have to contend with. There are literally hundreds of thousands to a million or more of these defense chemicals. And until you start talking specifics, until you start saying exact dosages, exact amount of leaves, exact amount, and which ones, like, this, that has 100 different toxins in it. Are they all hormetic at the exact same level, or even hormetic at all? I mean, is it one leaf enough? Is it too much, right? Half a leaf of hemlock will kill you, right? And so, people have the hemlock in their garden. They have to be careful. They can't just pick up the leaves and things like that and throw them out. They have to wear gloves, or else this stuff can leach into your body, and you can get very sick. So that for me is a non-starter, because they have not provided any evidence of any hormetic benefit. It's pure conjecture, and they're just saying, yeah, I bet you there's hormesis, and it just shuts people down, because they think oh, okay, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't stand to any scrutiny whatsoever. The idea of antioxidants is one that's been bandied around for decades now, but really this is a marketing ploy. They say oh, look, there's these antioxidants in acai berry. It's a superfood. Anything that they sort of deemed a superfood based on one chemical. You have to think this is probably just a marketing scheme. And yes, these things have antioxidants, but what they have a lot more of is oxidants. So they have things that cause oxidative stress. Right. And so I have a couple of antioxidants. Okay, great. But that's cherry picking. You're looking for the thing that you want, and you're ignoring all the rest of the evidence. So the rest of the plant, the rest of the berry has a lot of things that you actually don't want that can cause oxidative stress on top of everything else. So the amount of antioxidants you're getting is far outweighed by the amount of oxidants and just straight up toxins that are in these things. And also, you just don't have a normal, you can't even get a basic complement of nutrients from plants. You have to eat meat, or you have to take supplements, or you will be nutrient deficient, and you can get very, very sick. And a lot of these nutrients aren't even accessible to us. They're not bioavailable. They're bound up in ways that we can't access because we don't have physiology to break it down, because we're not designed to eat these things. That's clear evidence that we're not designed to eat these things, that we don't have the natural machinery to detoxify them and then extract all the nutrients. Cow can extract all the nutrients from the specific grasses they eat. They can detoxify the specific grasses that they eat, but they can't eat all grasses. Some grasses will actually kill them or make them sick. This is why you can put cows and sheep on the same piece of pasture land, because they eat different grasses. And so they're not competing for resources. And so even a cow that only eats grass its whole life, if it eats a plant or eats plants its whole life, if it eats a plant that's outside of that, it will get sick. It can even die. And there are a number of diseases in livestock and animal husbandry that, big head, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. All these things have names, but they are understood to be from, that cow or that sheep eating a specific plant that they weren't designed to eat, and they get a specific, it's not a disease. They get a specific set of symptoms that we know are from eating that thing. And we need to understand that diabetes and cancer and heart disease and autoimmune issues are that for humans. These are not diseases. This is an exposure relationship. In ancient Rome, they had lead pipes, and people were getting low-grade lead poisoning. People didn't realize that for a long time, and they're just like, yeah, I guess this is just normal. And then people were like, no, this isn't normal, and they figured it out. They figured out people were getting lead poisoning, right? So you can have lead poisoning that gives a specific, you can look at it at a molecular level. This causes specific damage and a specific disruption in the cellular metabolism, and you get neurological dysfunction, organ dysfunction. And you could call that a disease, and you could say, okay, well, let's get a pill that sort of mitigates that and helps you die slowly over 40 years. Or you can recognize this is a toxic exposure and from heavy metal poisoning, and you need to just remove that exposure. That's the first thing you do in an exposure relationship, is you remove the exposure. You get the person away from that, whatever toxic element is causing the harm, and then you let their body heal. Maybe you have medicines to help get them through that. But the first thing you do is remove the exposure. So we're in our ancient Rome with lead pipes. We are getting sick. We're getting this toxic exposure, and we have no idea why. But you see all these chronic diseases going up decade after decade after decade, and that is not a mistake. That's not a coincidence. 90% of Americans have at least one metabolic illness. 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. and the rest of the world is not far behind. In fact, some places are far worse. So, the idea that that this is going down is simply not true. A lot of these things are going up because we have better interventions. We have cardiac stenting. We have we can detect these things early. We have putting people on EKG, putting them a stress test, and we say, oh, okay, looks like they might have a little blockage, and you go and you fix that area of narrowing before it becomes a full blockage and they get a heart attack. So you're preventing heart attacks, which is great, but they still have cardiovascular disease, right? Yeah. And then you have bypass surgery and all these different sorts of interventions when someone does have a heart attack, does have a stroke. You can increase survival and you can help them get through this. But the disease burden is getting bigger. And in fact, the mortality rate is getting bigger from the 1960s and 70s anyway. And so those are just very misleading statistics, but that's par for the course for the people that say, oh, there's hormesis and antioxidants and all these sorts of, because it's the same thing. They're manipulating data and manipulating people and information to try and push an agenda.
Yeah. And that brings up something I was literally just talking about this today. I saw a clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who, I love the guy. I think most people love the guy. It's kind of hard not to. But someone was questioning about some of the results that we've seen from the vaccinations, right? Vaccinations, and there's like an increased risk of like stroke and heart incidents for like younger people, healthy people. And, the guy wasn't basically coming out and saying, okay, like, I think the vaccines were bad. He was just saying, look, like, we should look at the data. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, his response to this was that it is about scientific consensus. That he just basically made the argument, okay, like the individual scientist and their research does not matter. What matters is the consensus that is reached by the vast majority. And when I think about that, it like intuitively, it sounds really, really anti-scientific, right? Because at one point, the consensus said that the world was flat. At one point, the consensus said that the sun revolved around the earth, right? And if everybody had just listened to the consensus and said, well, 95% of scientists agree that this is the case, then we would never have any progress in science. So like, I can see how a consensus that was wrong could be reached because we've seen it, time and time throughout history. But I mean, what is it that you think has formed this general consensus that like, for example, like eating canola oil is healthy and eating butter is bad, and eating vegetables is healthy and eating meat is bad? Like, how did we get it so wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem. To err is human, right? And so we were going to make mistakes, and that's why even guidelines. People go, guidelines in medicine are written by bureaucrats first and foremost, and they get suggestions from different scientists and doctors, and they submit hundreds of pages. Hey, this is what we think from the scientist perspective. Bureaucrats get it, and they just do whatever the hell they want. And so when people say like, oh, we got to follow the guidelines, it's just like, do you know how the guidelines are made? Like, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. I mean, the guidelines are there for people that don't know the evidence, but if you're practicing evidence-based medicine, they don't always meet with those specific guidelines because guidelines take a while to change. They can be 10, 15 years behind, the current research. And so that's just an example of this, that we change these guidelines all the time because we get updated information, and our understanding of things changes, evolves, and develops. And so you can't say that just because people agree that this is what's going on, that's necessarily true. I mean, reality isn't decided by the majority vote, right? And I mean, there was a majority vote for slavery, in every single country across the world for ever, up until about 150 years ago, right? Or well, less than that in many places. So that's obviously not the good thing. Consensus does not beget morality, and it does not beget reality. And so that's quite an anti-scientific statement. There's a guy, he's a Nobel Prize winner in physics, and he was saying that He actually gave up his seat on the American Physical Society because they were saying about certain things, or like, this is decided, this is like 100% true, like this is it. And he was just like, he's like, you guys are still arguing over the weight of a proton. Okay, if you can argue over that, then you can argue over anything. All right, so you can never say this is decided. There's no argument here. We will broach no disagreement. That's ridiculous. That's dogmatic. That's a religious perspective. That's not a scientific perspective. Science is about finding the truth and understanding that you could be very wrong, and that there could be more information that comes out to show you're wrong. Einstein did this all the time. Disciples of his say, like, you prove this. You try to prove something mathematically. And it's like, oh, I proved this mathematically. I'm a brilliant, mathematician. But then when he went out and he got data and observed something, if that didn't meet with his mathematical equations, it was just like, okay, I was wrong. Something's wrong. Either my math was wrong or I didn't have all the variables. And he'd throw it out. But and so it doesn't matter how brilliant your theory is, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And so you can have all the consensus that you want, but things can still be wrong. And you have to be responsible enough to recognize that. So a lot of the consensus in human nutrition is, corrupted by industry money and various biased powers. So the entire field of dietary and nutritional sciences was actually founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in, I think, 1917. Not many people know that. I only found that out this year. But if you look at the history, there's a lady, Belinda Fettke, whose husband is Dr. Gary Fettke. He's an orthopedic surgeon here in Australia. And, they've done tons and tons and tons of research on human nutrition, how this affects health and disease. And she's done just brilliant work, really uncovering the history of nutritional sciences in America. And, she shows that this was started by the Seventh-day Adventists in 1917. And the problem with that is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is religiously anti-meat. They're religiously vegetarian because in the 1800s, they noticed that people were eating more meat. They were more interested in having sex and fornicating, things like that. And they're like, well, that begets lust. Therefore, meat is sinful because meat causes lust. Look it up. This is actually what they believe. And so they were just like, okay, we just got to stop eating meat. So we just eat plants. And I mean, what does that do? That suppresses your hormones. It suppresses your health. You're less healthy. And so your body's just saying, you're not going to be able to support a life. You're not going to be able, you don't have the resources to procreate. You just need to shut it down. That's why your natural instincts to procreate and have sex, go away. I mean, it's very difficult to suppress sexual urges in a teenager, but like a vegetarian diet can do it. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about a vegetarian diet. And so, but they found that to be a good thing. And so they've been pushing this for a long time. There's Dr. Kellogg's of Kellogg's cereal. He was a Seventh-day Adventist zealot, and he was also a congressman, a very influential scientist and thinker in the early 1900s. And he had a lot of influence on people, and he had a lot of influence on the country. And now his company that holds his name, Kellogg's, and their subsidiaries and their owners and everything like that, they have a lot of power as well. But they started this. They started this whole idea of nutritional sciences. So from the beginning, this has been corrupted. From the beginning, this has been biased. And you see this now. You see Loma Linda Medical Center, which is a Seventh-day Adventist hospital and medical school. They're the ones putting out a lot of these epidemiological surveys saying that meat's bad and you need to eat more fruits and vegetables. This is flawed data. It's extremely flawed, but it's also extremely biased. And they do things in a biased way. They say, oh, if you eat fast food, you get a Big Mac, fries, and a full sugar Coke. Oh, you eat meat. Like, okay, there's 90 other things in there, right? And all of them are from plants. And so, but they're blaming them, all the different nonsense that you get with the meat on the meat. Pizza, can sometimes have meat in the toppings. So they said, all right, well, therefore pizza is meat. And if you eat less pizza, you're eating less meat. Or you eat more pizza, you're eating more meat. You're just playing games at that point. You're intentionally trying to obfuscate the data and make things look different the way you want them to. And so that's a big problem. So you've had these influences from the get-go in nutritional sciences, specifically with more food science for more different sort of processed foods, and arguing that these processed foods that literally were designed through an industrial process for industrial purposes, and then people say that, hey, we can actually get people to eat this crap,
Canola oil,
this stuff never existed.
For example.
Yeah, all the seed oils and things like that. I think they were it was 1950s that these things first came around, and and certainly in human usage and for consumption, we're not designed to eat this stuff. This is not something we've ever seen before. I mean, the trans fats, those just really just turn into blockages and damage in your heart right away, because trans fats do not exist in nature. So we don't have any biochemistry that knows how to deal with trans fats. And these are all from the seed oils and cooking seed oils and things like that, and partially hydrogenating seed oils, vegetable oils. And so, these are things that we've never come across, right? And so how can we need something that didn't exist even 100 years ago? That makes absolutely no sense. And so need it, you have to have it as an essential nutrient. Of course, it's not an essential nutrient. Maybe you can argue it's not that bad for you. Maybe it does give you some benefit, come up with medicines and things like that, that confer a benefit in certain circumstances. But either way, we don't need it. We don't have to have it. Right. And so saying that these are the healthy oils, these are the healthy fats, as opposed to natural fats and that we've always been eating, that those are unhealthy. Those cause disease, even though they've never caused disease before. They're causing disease now, coincidentally, right when we started replacing animal fats with these seed oils, which had never existed. And if you look at the increase in heart disease and the rise in seed oil consumption, they perfectly track, right? And also with sugar and high fructose corn syrup, that perfectly tracks as well. And so there's a lot of information and evidence showing that things like sugar were actually strongly correlated with heart disease, which is a very little known thing in the until the mid 20th century, when people started paying more attention to this stuff. And they found that as you ate more sugar, in any country, heart disease rates started going up. And so the sugar companies, in a defensive action, ended up paying off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar. And they also paid off other people like Ansel Keys and many others. And one of these Harvard professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 declaration from the USDA saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol, stop eating both. So that's not my opinion. That's not something I heard from some guy. That was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016 from the University of California, San Francisco Medical School. Okay, that's a matter of record. That's a hard fact. And unlike the whole hormesis thing, saying that, I bet you they're hormetic, there's actual evidence of this, right? And so, we even know their contracts. We have the actual internal memos, the internal documents from the sugar company, called the Sugar Association at the time, detailing how they went about this, detailing the people that they paid. We have their names, we have their contracts, we know what they got paid. They got paid $6,500, which is equivalent to about $50,000 now. So they got a Kia out of it. That was what the health of the world was worth to them. They got a mid-sized sedan, and that was enough for them to just completely ruin the health of the world and sell their souls. Ansel Keys was another one of these guys that was bought and paid for by sugar companies. We have his contracts. We know what he was paid. And so then people, will then say, well, yes, he fudged all that stuff to do with cholesterol and heart disease, but cholesterol and heart disease totally still, cholesterol still totally causes heart disease. Based on what? Based on what we know to be compromised data, what we know to have been doctored and studies where they changed things to fit the picture that they wanted. Ansel Keys did the 7 Nations study, and it said, oh, look, when you eat more cholesterol, have more cholesterol, heart disease risk go up. But it's parabolic curve. It's exponential growth, right? And they're like, wow, that's really damning. And so Ansel Keys did this 7 Nations study where he looked at, 7 different nations, and as they increased the amount of their cholesterol levels, heart disease looked to go up, and it had this, this big upward trend. The problem is that he had complete data for like 22 different countries, and he excluded the countries that didn't fit that curve. So there were a number of countries that had very high cholesterol levels, but very low heart disease rates. And there were countries that had very low cholesterol levels, but very high heart disease rates. So, there wasn't really, it was just a scatter across the board. And so some people will say, it was like, well, yes, he did that. And yes, he shouldn't have done that. But, there's still maybe a slight correlation, and the other stuff he did, well, that was all good as gold. And he did other things that showed that cholesterol caused heart disease and was implicating it. So, that he's really just a great scientist. It's like, no, he's not. Like, we know he's compromised. We know he was bought and paid for. We know he falsified these things. So why would you trust anything else this guy did, especially on the same subject? This guy was bought and paid for by the sugar companies to vilify cholesterol. And he did this for years, right? So why would you think that if he did it with one, we have hard evidence that he did that with some of these things, like the 7 Nations study. Why would you trust anything else that guy did, especially when it comes to that specific subject? It makes absolutely no sense. So we have a lot of money and a lot of biased people in positions of authority that are pushing this. I mean, even in the WHO, it was like, I think it's 2015, they put out a report saying that processed meat was, like a low grade carcinogen, mm-hmm. and that red meat was a likely cause it carcinogen. That has thoroughly been debunked. And the University of Washington in Seattle just published a major paper last year showing that like these are just junk studies and junk science, and there's just very, very, they call it lazy science. All these lazy studies and lazy science, and they showed an extremely weak correlation at best. It was very, very weak evidence. And in fact, in the totality of the information available, there was absolutely no link or even correlation between processed meats and cancer, and certainly not unprocessed red meat. That had absolutely no shred of evidence that there was any sort of link. And in fact, a lot of evidence to show that there was no link between red meat and cancer, and or even processed meats and cancer. So the WHO saying that in 2015, when you look at the actual story behind it, because we do know this as well, they actually purposefully excluded several studies that completely countered the narrative that they put out about red meat being potentially a carcinogen and processed meat being a low-grade carcinogen. But what's processed meat processed with, right? It's not other meat. It's processed with plants and sugar, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're taking meat that's not carcinogenic, and all of a sudden you're processing it, it turns carcinogenic, well, that means that what you added to it is what caused the carcinogenic nature, right? Which are plants and sugar. That's how these things get processed, right? You get a salami, that's a processed meat, right? What is added to salami? It's not more meat. It's spices and sugar, right? And so if that's now carcinogenic, it's because of the spices and the sugar, not because of the meat. So either way, they excluded a lot of things that really showed that, this wasn't the case at all anyway. And there were a lot of dissenters on this panel at the WHO, and they were saying, hey, that's not right. You're excluding all these things. We should include these things. We shouldn't, this is the wrong conclusion. There's really not great evidence that this is carcinogenic. So we shouldn't be telling people that it is. And they were overruled, and the majority won, the consensus won. And so they said, the dissenters said, okay, look, half of you guys are either vegetarians, vegans, or Seventh-day Adventists, or all of the above, So, you should declare your biases. You should declare that you're vegans, vegetarians, and religiously anti-meat. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that, because like this is an ideology. They're pushing an ideology. If they were doing this honestly, they'd say, hey, look, I am vegetarian, but look, this is what this study shows. This is what it is. But hey, look, I may be biased because I'm a vegetarian. They were like, absolutely not. We're not going to tell anybody that. And so, so it's been subsequently shown ad nauseum to have been garbage. And so, unfortunately, we just have a lot of these influences, and we need to get around it. I mean, just in research terms, Coca-Cola, they spend more than 11 times the money on nutritional research than the NIH. Okay, just Coca-Cola. And so all these other, food and sugar companies are all putting out, big money to push their product. And the problem with industry research is a lot of the time the designs are flawed, and they'll do things like calling pizza meat and all that sort of garbage. But the other thing is that if they get a result that they don't want, that doesn't make their product look good, they just don't publish it. They just bury it, right? Because they own it. They did it. They don't have to publish it.
Right.
And I think, and then that's, it's a liable mission. You have evidence to show something. We should be adding to the totality of human understanding and knowledge. We shouldn't be trying to bury things that are inconvenient for our product. There's a good example of that with Jesus Christ, probiotics, right? So you take these probiotics, they're supposed to help your gut health. That's what it's claimed anyway. And what that's based on was that there was a study with 6 people that showed, maybe a bit of an improvement, right? So like, oh, okay, great. This is a proof of concept. We'll get this out there, clinically proven to help whatever. So one of these companies actually hired a gastroenterologist here in Perth, where I'm living in Australia, and they did a study with much larger study, saying like, okay, let's get some more evidence here. They wanted to show their product work, which is laudable. That's great. The problem was that it actually didn't work, and it didn't show benefit. In fact, it showed that it made people worse. And so they're like, okay, they're getting ready to publish the results, and they just got a letter from the lawyers from this company. It just said, if you publish that, we're going to sue you. And so they were like, they weren't allowed to publish the study that they had just finished. And that's how industry research works. So the abstract is available, and you can actually find the abstract talking about how, like, yep, this didn't work. It's not good. But the actual study is buried. You can't get it. But more recently, there was a study, actually, there were other studies that came out actually showing again that what we knew for years, because the studies had already been done, that probiotics don't work. They actually make things worse. And so that's the problem with industry research. But that is the vast majority of research out there is industry research and industry funded research. And not all of it is declared as industry funded research, as we saw with, the sugar companies and Ansel Keys and those Harvard professors. They did not declare that those were industry funded studies. They thought, wow, these are just good old fashioned studies that Harvard's doing. No, they were industry funded. And so you have to declare those sorts of things. And so, the waters are very muddied. And so when you're looking at this, you have a bunch of people, oh, look at this study and look at this study and look at, the canola oil shows this and that. I'm like, oh, great. I'm happy for you. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, and in either way, this thing didn't exist even 100 years ago. Why would I put that in my body? Why am I thinking that that's an essential nutrient? Why am I thinking that that's an essential fat? Why am I thinking that that's a preferred fat, a preferable fat than the one that I've been designed to consume and to subsist on, and that my ancestors have been living on and subsisting on since time immemorial, since the dawn of man? Doesn't make sense. People say, well, people only lived until they were like 35 back then. complete garbage. They lived much longer than that. Is that the infant mortality rate was 3 out of 5. If 3 out of 5 people are dying at age 0, then the other 2 have to live pretty damn old to even get up to 35. And people are dying in wars and famine. The lions are eating them, all sorts of crazy things. And, so the people that actually, so that doesn't tell you what people, how old people were when they died of old age, right? That was old as hell. And there's a lot of documentation. And even going back to Herodotus, the father of modern history, he chronicled a meeting between an emissary from the Persian Empire and the Ethiopian king, right? And so they were talking there, and the king of Ethiopia asked the Persian diplomat, okay, what does your emperor eat and how long do your people normally live? And they explained growing wheat and making bread. And they said, people would normally live around 70 years, right? About 2,600 years ago. And the king of Ethiopia sort of laughed at him and said, well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. Our people just eat meat. We eat boiled meat. We only drink the milk of our cattle. And our people would typically live 120 years, some people much longer, right? That sounds braggadocious, right? But we know as geneticists for 20 years now that genetically humans are designed to live 120 years on average, meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and just don't mess up, you should make it to 120 without doing anything special, right? You should just make it there. So Dr. Sinclair from Harvard is like trying to get people to live, over 100, 120. You can already do it. All you have to do is just stop eating crap and just eat what you're supposed to eat, and you'll get there. And so that's what people were doing, in Ethiopia. The Native Americans, they talk about, Native Australians, there are many, 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 chronicled encounters with them, talking about how was this person, how was that person, well, this person was born at this time when, this war started or whatever. And they're like, dude, that was like 105 years ago. That's nuts. This guy looks like he's 60. That can't be true. The longest lived Native American by their records, and that's a problem. We don't have official birth certificates for these people. And so people say, well, they're just full of it. Dude was 137 years old, right? And so it's like Chief White Wolf by John Smith as well, I think. And 137 years old. And, there are a number of different doctors and people like, Dr. J.H. Salisbury of the Salisbury Steak. He did a 30-year research project into optimal nutrition for human beings. And he lived with the Native Americans and studied how they were just eating meat and, hunting buffalo, eating a lot of fat and red meat. And these people were living to be 110, 115 years old. And as Stone Age nomads with a pack on their back, following the buffalo herds day in and day out. They weren't just, sitting in a nursing home, turning to dust for 40 years. They were hale and hearty, active adults until they drop dead. And that's what you see in the wild. That's what you see in zoos, is that animals, when they're eating what they're supposed to eat, when they're getting the proper resources, they basically go and they work at this level because they have to hunt, they have to fight, they have to run away, they have to get away, or else they get eaten, or else they starve to death. But once they get to a point where they've been able to do that, they just sort of go like, yep, that's it. And they just die. And, we don't do that. We slowly degrade, and maybe quickly degrade for decades and decades and decades. Basically, you hit 25 and everyone goes downhill. You hit 30 and people are like, well, that's it for you. And that's not the case. That is not how it's supposed to be. The natural state for humans is one of health. And yet everyone's sick and we're getting sicker. So obviously that means something's changing. Our genetics didn't change in the last 40 years. Our environment had to have changed. And so, since that 1977 declaration by the USDA, we radically changed the way we ate. Meat became toxic and poison. So we stopped eating meat. We stopped eating red meat and eggs, especially because they had higher level of saturated fat and cholesterol, because they're, of course, the worst, right? No, actually, they're the best. And we increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased grains, increased fructose, high fructose corn syrup, tripled our consumption since the 1970s. Our seed oil consumption over tripled since the 1970s. And what happened? The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rates tripled. Type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even autoimmune disorders and neurodevelopmental delays such as autism increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before, and now they're the only things we treat. Maybe for age adjusted, they were just the same thing, but in real numbers, they barely existed. And so, you can't say that red meat and saturated fat cause heart disease if you reduce red meat and saturated fat and cholesterol, and heart disease rates triple. Right. If anything, you can say that it was protective. And in fact, that's what the studies are now showing in the last decade. We're showing with massive studies with hundreds of thousands of people showing that the higher your LDL cholesterol, the less heart attacks you have, the longer you live, the less likely you are to get Alzheimer's and dementia and other sorts of degenerative diseases, the less likely you are to go into a nursing home. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology actually published in 2020 a massive paper looking at all the available evidence and data, meta-analyses, and showed that there is no upper limit on saturated fat consumption. There's no unsafe amount of saturated fat. You can just keep eating it. They found no connection, no correlation even between saturated fat consumption and heart disease. In fact, they found an inverse correlation between saturated fat consumption and stroke rates. So the more saturated fat people eat, the lower their stroke rate. The less saturated fat they eat, the higher their stroke rate, right? So that's significant, and that's something that people need to know about and not be misled on. And, a lot of these studies, that the only studies showing any sort of connection between cholesterol levels and saturated fat are either falsified and doctored, but even then they were only correlative studies. They only showed a correlation between higher levels of cholesterol and heart disease, right? You cannot prove causation from correlation. That's a definition of terms. If you have a correlation and a study that only shows correlation, you cannot, doesn't matter how strong the correlation is, you cannot prove causation from that. Cannot. And all of these things are just correlational. But if you show that there's no correlation in study after study with hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, no correlation, that proves there is no causation. You cannot have causation without first having correlation, right? So if there's no correlation, there is no causation. And that's what we're finding with saturated cholesterol. There is no correlation. Therefore, there is no causation. And so we need to radically rethink what we're doing as doctors and as people living our own lives, and how we eat and what we avoid and why.
And I'm totally with you. I learned some really good stuff from you there. I really liked how you address the hormesis also. Your argument against that was a really well worded one that I hadn't heard before, but it makes a lot of sense because the scientific method, right? We have to be able to have everything be controlled. So if you're dealing with Brussels sprouts that have 136 carcinogens in them, how can you determine a certain level of hormesis? And also, I don't need a lot of convincing that like the political establishment and the people in power are like, I'm not very convinced that they have our best interests in mind. I think that a lot of times it's just down to money. And I think that a lot of science has been corrupted that way. And I definitely agree with a lot of your points there. There was one specific thing I wanted to ask you about too. So with my diet, since I've been doing kind of the more carnivore type diet, essentially what I've gotten into now is I do, primarily red meat. I try to avoid, chicken, pork, but I will do chicken, a couple times a week, fish, maybe once a week or something like that. But the bulk of my diet is basically, grass-fed red meat, pasture-raised eggs, grass-fed, non-homogenized, low-temperature pasteurized milk. Just try to get the best quality that I can. And then I also do quite a bit of fruit. So I'm doing, blueberries, I'm doing pineapple, papaya, specifically with fruit. Is there any benefit there? Is it, I haven't heard it be as bad as necessarily the vegetables, but I've heard arguments kind of both ways. What are your thoughts on fruit in general?
Well, I mean, fruit can be certainly used best, I think, for like survival. You know, like if you were lost out in the woods and you ran out of food, and you came across some berries that you knew about, some like blackberries. I'm like, okay, I recognize that as blackberries, or like an apple or something like that. You know, that's something that's good to have in those situations and know about those. I mean, the problem is that even if you think of just berries and fruits in general, if you were out and I mean, there's a lot of fruiting trees and there's a lot of berries on bushes, and you can't just eat anyone that you want. I mean, there are very specific fruits and berries that we eat. So in fact, most berries and fruits are still poisonous, and actually still deadly poisonous, because the plant wants something to eat the fruit and then move the seed, but not necessarily you, and not necessarily a wide variety of animals. A lot of these, especially berries, evolved with like birds and other sort of smaller animals. A good example of this is the cassowary bird, which is like a tropical bird here in Australia and elsewhere, and it only eats fruit and berries. And there's about 100 different tropical fruits that they eat, and every single one will kill you. In fact, every single one will basically kill any animal apart from the cassowary bird. And that's because that seed can only germinate in the gut of a cassowary bird. And so if it's not a cassowary bird that eats it, that seed does not turn into a plant. And so there is a strong survival benefit and mechanism to stop anything else except the cassowary bird from eating it. And in fact, if a cassowary bird leaves an area, those plants will die out. They will not have any further generations. So it's very important to the plant to have the right animal eat them. So a lot of fruit and berries are still toxic. Now, the ones that are edible, a lot of these things are adulterated. A lot of these things have been, I mean, we don't eat natural apples. We don't eat natural mangoes or papayas, all these sorts of things. These have been heavily bred to be much more sweet and have different, so they're different than they were before. And so, that or adding GMOs or all these sorts of things that like just change it genetically to be different. So this isn't something so we didn't grow up on mangoes. We didn't evolve on mangoes. We didn't evolve on these apples. They were very different plants back then. None of the fruits and even vegetables that we eat nowadays even existed 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, when the predecessors to Homo sapiens were turning into Homo sapiens, and so it wasn't until very recently that we're eating these things at all. So I think that's, a good, and also you don't have to eat fruit, you can get everything you need from meat. They didn't exist 50,000 years ago anyway. So I think that's pretty good argument that you don't need it necessarily. You can have it. And I think that, that can provide benefit just from pure enjoyment. People enjoy these things. They like having a bit of variety. They like the taste, and then if you're starving or something like that, obviously, fruit is going to be a very good option. The other problem is that basically what I was just going to say is that, but it's not necessarily optimal. It's not necessarily the best that you can possibly do for yourself and get the best possible health outcome. Like if you're just eating meat and fruit, like you're doing better than 99.999% of people out there. You're going to be very healthy. You're going to feel great, unless you really eat too much fruit, because sugar is sugar. Sugar, fructose has been shown to be addictive. It's very addictive. And it can give a dopamine signal to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And there are actually studies showing that people that are sugar addicted can actually kill the same areas of their brain to people that are addicted to meth to the same extent as meth. We have that on MRI studies showing that. And that fructose is broken down in your liver into the same byproducts as alcohol. So you get the same damage to your liver and body from those breakdown products because they're identical. They're the same products. And so you get fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease. It's even implicated in things like cancer and Alzheimer's. So, so it's addictive, that sugar is. And so, but the fruit that have fructose, we've just noticed that these are much less toxic than other plants or other fruits. And so it's thought that the reason we recognize fructose as very, very sweet is because we recognize it as something safe. We recognize it's like, okay, this is going to give me energy. It's going to give me a boost. And, fruit, when you're, low on energy, I mean, fructose is actually very high energy. And it's like one of the quickest ways to replenish your liver's glycogen. So that's good. If you're really struggling out in the wild, like that's actually a good nutritional source. Fat's better; it's much more nutrient dense than sugar, but sugar's a good option in those circumstances. But we also understand that it's safe. It doesn't cause something like an acute poisoning reaction that day. The fructose long term can cause problems, and arguably less than in its isolated form and table sugar. You're adding it to things. It's coming with a lot of other things. Coming with a lot of other vitamins and nutrients. It's coming with fiber, and fiber, while that's not actually all that beneficial, one thing that it can do is it can actually stall and reduce the amount of fructose that you absorb. And so you're not actually getting, if you're eating an apple, you're going to get much less fructose absorption than if you squeezed that apple and drank the juice. So there are a lot of little, nuances to this. But even then, even with plants or fruit that have fructose, there can actually still be defense chemicals. So they're just much less, and they're not things that are going to kill us that day. But all citrus fruit have what are called furanocoumarins, which are defense chemicals, and they're light sensitive. So you have UV light that comes down and interacts with the furanocoumarins, and they bind irreversibly to proteins and DNA and damage them permanently. And this can be seen because you can get in your body and it can cause problems, but also even just getting on your skin. I mean, like people like in the summer, when people are like in junior high and high school, they'll put like lime juice in their hair. They'll go out in the sun. It'll like bleach their hair, right? It'll lighten their hair. That's happening in different sorts of chemical reactions happening in your body can happen on your skin as well. And there are actual documented cases of people like squeezing limes out in the sun and getting like 2nd-degree burns on their hands just from that interaction with the light. And so, it's not completely benign, but also this is why you have to be very careful with like grapefruit juice and different medications. There are some medications you just cannot take with grapefruit juice. And that's because of these furanocoumarins, and your liver is detoxifying them. And we are better able to detoxify those things than others. That's 100% true. But we do have to detoxify them. And so the enzymes in our liver that detoxify these things, especially in grapefruit juice or in grapefruits, they're the same enzyme that metabolize different medications. And so if you run out of those enzymes, now you're not going to metabolize your medications properly, meaning that you're either not going to have enough to do what you need, or you're going to get a toxic level. Your body's not going to be able to break it down and get rid of it. And so you're going to build up and get a toxic dose. So that's just that's just sort of an example of that. But yeah, I agree that those sorts of fruits, especially sweet fruits, are far less toxic than other parts of the plant, 100%. But I do think that fructose in general is a bit problematic. Most people, like I'm sure you're probably fine. You probably have a bit of fruit and sort of limit that. But a lot of people can't. I mean, even Andrew Huberman, from the Huberman Lab, he was talking about he tried a carnivore diet, and he tried incorporating sort of fruit and honey, and he said that it didn't make him feel better. He didn't get better energy levels. But what he found was that he just started eating more of it and more of it and more of it and more of it, and it dramatically increased his sort of desire and appetite for food and for fruit and honey. And so that's something that I see people get into. Not everyone can sort of curtail that impulse, and a lot of people are coming to a carnivore diet because they have health problems and food problems and weight problems, and they were sugar addicts. And then reintroducing those sugars can sometimes sort of re-trigger that. And then they, a little bit of an addictive substance can easily turn into a lot more very quickly. And some people, fall off the slopes and they get they start eating more of it and more of it, and they're adding honey to everything, and they're eating fruit all the time. And then they start, going back to eating processed sugars and carbs. And they're 6 months later, they're back on the couch eating pizza and drinking Coke. And I've had a number of people tell me that they've sort of gone down that path, and they say, okay, I need to just go back, and I just have to do it just meat and water. I have to be very strict with myself because, they're just the type of people that can't limit that sort of thing. I've never had a problem with that. I could have some sweet stuff or some, gummy bears or whatever, and I might have like too much in one sitting, but after that, I'm like, ugh, I don't want that stuff. I want to stay the hell away from it. And, but not everyone's like that. Also, as far as athletics are concerned, I think you get a big benefit by not eating any carbs at all, because when you're eating carbohydrates, you raise your insulin, and your insulin blocks lipolysis, blocks proteolysis, stops your body from mobilizing your energy stores and your fat stores. And through gluconeogenesis, making blood sugar, making glycogen, making ketones, and fueling your body to an unlimited capacity. And this is things like, Professor Tim Noakes in South Africa, who's a sports medicine doctor. He's one of the more renowned sports medicine doctors in the world. He, for 30 years, said, you have to eat carbs to burn carbs. You have to eat carbs, especially as a high performance athlete. And now he's just like, I got it completely wrong. You don't have to do that. And in fact, you don't want to, because, when you're not eating carbohydrates, you're tapped into your fat stores. You can always make more carbs and glycogen from your fat stores. Whereas when you're eating sugar, yeah, you'll get an initial hit, and you'll get a rush and a bump in your blood sugar and glycogen, but you'll shut down your body's ability to replenish your glycogen and your blood sugar. And so eventually you'll run out. And, so if you're just doing like normal sort of training or whatever, you may not see much of a difference. But if you're like a distance athlete or high performance athlete, or you're really trying to kill yourself in the gym, then you will run into problems, and you'll hit the wall, and you have to keep eating fruit or keep eating sugar and things like that to bolster your energy levels up. So I think that if people want to do that, that's fine. Be aware that especially people that have had sugar addictions and things like that, be very careful with that. People with autoimmune issues really do need to be very strict. I mean, a lot of people with autoimmune issues can't even handle like pork, chicken, fish, and eggs, and certainly not dairy. And so fruit really, really will set them off as well. So it just depends on the person. It depends on the situation. Milk, I think I love milk, and especially raw milk is delicious. It just tastes like you're just drinking life force. I love it, yeah. But it does have enough lactose that it can raise your insulin and sort of derange your metabolism as well. So it's just something to know about and think about, and then, make the right choice, for the individual.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great info. I actually, you're inspiring me to maybe just, try to cut the fruit out and see anecdotally, how I feel over a couple week period. I
think you'll feel better, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially after a few weeks, because it can take some time to get, fat adapted is what they call it. Mm-hmm. But Professor Noakes found that, he did studies on keto athletes versus, carb fueled athletes. And they had dozens of people, and they had one that was like keto adapted and one that was eating carbs. And to get keto adapted, they said, okay, you're going to be on a ketogenic diet for at least 42 days. They really wanted to make sure that they were burning things optimally. But they found that actually everyone was very keto adapted within 3 weeks. Some people were quicker than others, but they basically found that no one took longer than 3 weeks. But interesting about that study was that they just basically, you put the people on the treadmill basically and just be like, okay, go for it. And their effort level, everything like that was matched. Like both groups, there wasn't one that was better than the other. And then they switched them. So the people that were eating carbs now went on a keto diet, and the other guys started eating carbs again. They checked them again in 42 days, and they found that, yeah, everyone's still bang on. The difference being that, they didn't test this in that study, but the difference being that the fat adapted guys, while they could put out the same amount of effort as the carb fueled guys, they could actually just keep going and keep going and keep going after that, because they were generating their carbs all the time. There's a guy just interviewed actually who's featured on the Noakes Foundation website. He's a guy, Sean Sikowski, I think it's pronounced, and he's a endurance cyclist, and he's 50 years old. He's turning 51 in a couple months, and he's doing these massive endurance races, that are like 6, 9, 12 hours long, and he's just like, well, okay, I just want to try to do well and just try to go to a good pace and just see how I do, but I want to do it faster. So he does basically carnivore. But definitely keto, maybe have some vegetables or something like that every now and then, but he's just meat and fat by, for the most part. And so he didn't eat at all the day of the race. He didn't eat at all during the race. He ended up coming in 5th in this like 198 kilometer, ride or something like that. And one of his races, they calculated his output, and he had no refeeding. And like all these other people that were doing it, they're like sucking down the sugar gel packets, and like the guys are just like, oh my God, they're just dying. And he's just like, you guys are not really, and he was just fine. He was just going. He didn't eat the whole day. He didn't refeed. He didn't do anything. He just like ate like a stick of butter, like for it. Like that was it. That was what he ran on. And there was another race that he did where his caloric output, they calculated it at 1,000 kilocalories per hour, which like the Tour de France guys are putting out between 900 and 1,100 kilocalories per hour, right? So he's up there at professional pro, like Tour de France level output. And he maintained that for 6 hours straight. So he burned 6,000 calories just straight through, just go, 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 go. Didn't eat, didn't refeed. And he was fine, and, and so that just goes to show you that like you are going to have far more of a battery if you actually run on your fat stores. You cannot store, that much glycogen. You just can't. You're going to run out. And so, but when you're not eating carbs, then you will constantly replenish your glycogen, your blood sugar. We saw that in studies in wolves. Actually, in 1981, there was a study looking at that because people were like, you have to eat carbs or burn carbs. And they said like, well, wolves don't carbo load before they chase caribou for 10 hours. So like, what are they doing? Do they have carbs? Do they have blood sugar? Do they have liver glycogen? And they found out, yes, they do. And it's rock solid. Like it does not change. It's steady the whole time, because as they're using the glycogen, their body's replenishing the glycogen stores. And so it's just this constant, use and replenishment. And so, that can happen with us as well. And so, as give yourself a bit of a time, give yourself sort of 2-3 weeks to get acclimatized to it, especially with your workouts. Like for me, I was having better workouts day one. I felt, much better day one. But some people like Huberman was saying that his workouts weren't as great in the first couple of weeks. And that really distressed him, because he loves working out. That's something that really brings him a lot of joy. And so he was just like, okay, well, what do I do? And so, he sort of incorporated fruit and honey, thinking, okay, well, this is what, people, he actually spoke to Dr. Saladino and said, I'm thinking of reincorporating carbs. What do you think? And he was like, okay, well, just try the fruit and honey sort of thing. And he found that actually didn't help his energy levels. It didn't help his exercise, but it actually made him like overeat and want to eat a whole bunch of more fruit. So that actually was a detriment for him. So he didn't go quite long enough, I think. There's other things you do too. You need to eat enough. You need to eat enough fat. You don't want to eat within several hours of a workout. You really want to train fasted, because if you eat a big meal of fat and meat, then you just get lethargic. A lot of your blood's going to your digestive tract, and it's not in your muscles in your brain. So, that's got to be first and foremost. And you put yourself in the rest and digest mode. Your body's saying like, why are you expending energy? We've already gotten energy. We're done for the day. Just shut it down, just rest. And so there's a lot of different reasons, but that can also be one of them, is that for some people, it can take sort of 2-3 weeks before you get fat adapted. So, if you were going to try it, I would give yourself at least 30 days and just like really, see how you go. And usually like you might right away feel better, but it might be towards that last week or two that you really start feeling a lot better, especially in your workout. So I just give it at least that amount of time to give it a fair shot.
Got it. Yeah. I'm motivated. I'm definitely gonna try it out. So,
Awesome.
I have a couple of questions I want to run through real quick. I typically ask
Mhm.
these, just all my guests. They're a little bit, kind of more personal on like your habits and things like that. The first one I wanted to ask was if you have any, daily habits that you like to run through. Just, a couple habits that are part of your day, help you with your routine.
Well, I'm trying to get more sort of early morning light and doing like a bit of cold exposure and a lot of, I've always sort of, understood like when I go camping or I go out or whatever, like I just feel so much better. I'm just going to sleep with the sun coming down and waking up when it goes up. And that always made me feel better. So intuitively I was like, okay, maybe there's something to that, but just seeing more and more research come out about that. And, and again, going back to Dr. Huberman, he really lays a very, very strong foundation of evidence for that sort of thing. So the early morning cold exposure and getting out, getting that early morning light, getting your body signals. Your body is so sensitive to the world around us that it's very important to get those signals and get them at the right time. And so I'm trying to do that more. Before it was just I don't have time to do anything because I was up at 5 a.m. in the hospital at 5:30 or 6, and I was there until God knows when, maybe the next day, and then doing, usually working like 6-7 days a week. So that really wasn't possible to have a routine. It was just I get up, I shower, I get out the door. So the main thing that kept me going was really just the diet and just eating, big fatty steak, at least once a day. And that's what got me through. But now I'm taking a bit of time off and doing other things. So I'm not as busy. I'm still sort of maybe just working, time and a half as opposed to triple time. And so I have a bit more time. So I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to get the morning exposure, cold exposure, sun exposure, things like that. Just get outside, just be outside more, get my feet on the grass, things like that, and just see how it affects me. Whether or not it's giving me a bunch of health benefits, it feels nice. It's nice to just be outside and not be cooped up all day. So that's sort of been my routine. And I'm trying to get back into working out. It's been a long time since I've had time to go to the gym. And so I'm trying to get back into a routine of working out as well. I like to go to the gym 4 days a week. I like to work out 4 days a week, at least have that as a baseline and then add workouts from there. And and hopefully I sort of banged up my knee. So I'm trying to rehab that and maybe even go back and play rugby. That would be fun.
Okay. Yeah. Great stuff. I do a lot of the same things. I've really been getting into the ice baths in the mornings, and I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. I train jiu-jitsu, anywhere 2 to 4 times a week, and I work in a gym during my day job, so I'm in the gym all the time too. But that stuff makes a big difference with recovery as well, just keeping you going for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to say too. I actually did. I did pancration and Muay Thai kickboxing since I was like 14. So I've always loved that, and I wrestled since I was a kid as well. And that was one thing that I was like sort of thinking about getting back into, but I don't know if there's any places in Perth that actually do that. Every time I went to like such a good place that I sort of got a bit spoiled. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's AMC Kickboxing in Kirkland. That my trainer was Matt Hume, and like in the UFC, like Mighty Mouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
have you heard of that guy? So he trains at AMC now. And so he trains with Matt, and I was there since I was like 14. So this is literally 30 years ago. Actually 30 years, coming up on 29 years ago that I started there. So it's been a long time since I've done any of that, but it was amazing. I loved the sport. It was just so much fun. And but like since I moved away from there and I stopped training at AMC, I go to other gyms and I was just like, all right, well, we'll try it out. And I was just like, these guys are all doing it wrong. And I was just like, well, I don't want to go there and just like learn bad habits. So I just like, I felt it was like better to not train at all than to like train and pick up bad habits. So, but that also meant that I didn't actually continue on with it, which kind of sucked. And so I'm not happy with that decision, really.
Yeah. Hopefully you can find a spot to get back into it, man. It's, I know for me, it's been life-changing. I've been doing jiu-jitsu. I'm 33. I've been doing martial arts for, 16 years. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for, 12 years. And it's definitely changed me for the better. Definitely changes the way that you
Yeah.
go through life, and great place to de-stress. It's like kind of a meditative thing too. You really have to get out of your head, because if you're in your head while somebody's trying to like kill you, someone's trying to choke you out, it just doesn't go well. Kind of forces you to get into the zone a little bit, get into the flow. So,
Yeah, definitely.
I know you've read obviously a ton of research. What about like, are you a big reader in general? Do you have like a couple book recommendations you'd put out there for people?
Well, I do. Yeah, I do. I do try to read for pleasure. Right now, I'm going back through like the old like classics. Like I'm reading,
Same.
yeah, sort of some of the classic literature, like reading like Thucydides and like the old histories of ancient Greece and the Peloponnesian War and things like that. And then Sophocles. I've been reading a lot of Sophocles plays recently, and I don't know. I've always had a fascination with ancient Greece, and like since I was a kid, I loved like Greek myths and all the old heroes and things like that. I would read those all the time as a kid, and but I think more recently I've been, well, in the past several years, I think most of the books that I've read for pleasure have been like Thomas Sowell, who I think is just the most brilliant person in the world alive right now. And I honestly think he's probably the most brilliant and well-developed thinker that America's ever produced. And he's a world-class economist and historian and thinker and just, philosopher. And the man is just absolutely brilliant. He's written over 50 books. And not including rewrites or compilations of essays and things like that. And he's still writing. The guy's like 90. I think he published another book on his 92nd birthday. He's still producing, wow. And just a brilliant man. And then also like Victor Davis Hanson. I've been reading a lot of his histories. They're both at Stanford. They're at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. So Sowell is a senior fellow in economics at Stanford Hoover Institution. That's been rated like the top think tank in the world for decades. And Victor Davis Hanson is also there. He's the senior fellow in military history and classics. And so he's written a lot of really, really interesting books on ancient Greece and Rome and just the histories of civilization in general and particularly military history. So I've just been liking those. But I do try to read for fun, but I don't have all that much time. So
sure.
I try to like, make my time count.
Gotcha. And the last question I'd like to ask is, so let's say you could go back in time to, a teenage version of yourself, give yourself a piece of advice. Do you have like any piece of advice you'd go back in time and give to yourself, just kind of knowing what you know now?
Yeah. Don't eat plants.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so pissed that I have not been doing this my whole life. I'm so pissed that I had the Holy Grail in my house and for 5 years and then just let it slip away. Like that bothers me to this day. And I remember when I got back into just eating a carnivore diet, when I was 38. And I just felt amazing. I remember after just 2 weeks back on a carnivore, just dropping the plants, just dropping the greens. I wasn't eating carbs, wasn't eating sugar, wasn't drinking alcohol. It was just greens and lean meat and not a lot of meat and a lot of greens. And just cutting out the greens and eating a lot more fatty meat. In 2 weeks, I felt like just a different breed of human. And I remember seeing how I felt. And I was overweight and I was not in shape, but I felt amazing. And I remember seeing how I felt and just looking back on the rest of my life and realizing that I felt like crap my whole life. And it really pissed me off. And I was just like, I was robbed my birthright. I was robbed, my development. Like none of us developed to our genetic potential. Before the agricultural revolution, the average brain size was 11% larger than it is now. Our brains are not as big as they would have been. Our brains are not as well developed as they should have been. And our bodies aren't as bigger. They're not as big. They're not as strong. We don't have the same bone density and muscle mass potential that we would have had. And so, humans, when they're eating like, big mammoths and things like that, then when they're just eating a bunch of fatty meat, they were on average like 6'2" to 6'4" on average. The Maasai in Africa, they're like on average 6'2", 6'4". And so the average adult male height in America is 5'8", right? And so that's a very big difference. And so we were robbed from that. And like, I really wish that I just like, I tell people now, talk to teenagers and sometimes people's parents want me to, talk to their kids and help them get on this and convince them. And I just talk to them like, I wish to God someone had this conversation with me and just said like, this is massive, massive edge that you can have in sports and just in life by just eating the right way and letting your body work and develop properly. You're going to grow an extra 6 inches. You're going to be, a hell of a lot smarter, a hell of a lot stronger, and a better athlete. I was just like, I would have loved to get that advice when I was a kid and then stick with it and never come off of it.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely on brand with the message. And I like that too. Yeah. So I definitely recommend like anybody, I watched your Plants Are Trying to Kill You speech, on YouTube. I definitely recommend anybody to check that out. I'm sure that you would probably recommend that's a great way to get introduced to kind of some of the things we talked about today, on a deeper level. But for anybody looking to learn more about you or learn more about the carnivore diet, I mean, do you have some resources or any, I'll put links up and everything in the description too, but how should somebody, reach out to you to learn more, or where can they learn more?
So, I'm active on social media. I have a YouTube channel. It's just Anthony Chaffee, MD. And that's where I have all my videos, and I have playlists set up that people can look at, like, just my podcast. I have a podcast called The Plant Free MD that can be on any podcast platform. And on YouTube, there's a playlist with those podcast videos as well. And I also have, if people are interested in, because there's a lot of information out there, and I even have a lot of videos out there, but I made a playlist called Carnivore Starter Kit. And I think that has a collection of videos that I think are probably the more important ones to start with, and to really understand like why we're doing this and how to do it. And also, what the main arguments are behind that. And the very first video I did was really to try to cover most of the arguments. It was called The Facts About Carnivore and Vegan Diets. And that was because I'd just done a live debate online with the Australian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, ACNM. And we had a carnivore versus vegan debate. And we had, basically 3 doctors on each side arguing for animal-based carnivore or plant-based vegan or vegetarian. And, we won that debate, and I just sort of put my arguments in one package and sort of put that up. So I think that's probably a good argument there, just that has a lot of the salient points. And then Why We Are Carnivores with a slide presentation that I did, that one. And then the Plants Are Trying to Kill You. I think especially the one that I did I presented that at a medical conference. And so it's under the Low Carb Down Under thing, but that's also on that playlist. And so I think that's a very good place for people to start, especially for that one, the facts about the carnivore and vegan diets. I think that probably encompasses most of these arguments pretty well, and then get into more detail in those other videos, like the Plants Are Trying to Kill You or the Why We Are Carnivores one. And then just Instagram. I'm mostly active on like Instagram and Twitter, kind of. And my Instagram is just Anthony Chaffee MD as well. Twitter is just Anthony_Chaffee. And then you can find other silly social media things like TikTok and all that garbage on, through links in there. But those are the main ones.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Anthony, I had a great time speaking with you today. I learned a lot. You've inspired me to make even some more changes to my diet here. Cool. And I'll definitely reach out and, let you know how the results have gone. But thanks again for coming on. Really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, man. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast, and hopefully you learned at least one lesson on today's episode. Our mission here is to uncover practical wisdom to create a better way of living for our audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us by leaving the show a review on your podcast platform of choice and by giving it a share on social media. This really helps us to grow our audience and to continue to add more episodes. If you are interested in learning more, please check out our website at renaissance-wisdom.com or check out the book that started it all, Renaissance Wisdom: How to Flourish in the Modern Day, now on Amazon. Thank you again, and may wisdom be your guide.